Hello, today we're having a look at Lab 8. So, looks like this. I gave you some starter files. If you want to do your own thing, you can. So here's the specifications. So this is going to be a 3-page website. Notice I'm only giving you specs for 2 pages because the first page is this page, which is done. But the reason I gave this to you, pretty simple page like that, is if you wanted to turn this into a series of requires, like head, foot, nav, I think that would serve you well. But basically those specs are written for that and that. So on the register page, pretty straightforward stuff, some of it. So we're going to verify that the form was submitted. That's an is set. We're going to sanitize the data. We're going to have a look at that password and enforce some integrity of that password. We're going to salt and hash the password, and then we're going to store everything. I'm also going to write an if not exists for my table, because that's a good idea. And on the login page, it's an even simpler form. It's going to have 2 pieces to it. You are going to it's just a username and a password, and depending on whether the username and the password is correct, you're going to say, either good job or bad job. It's kind of a weird exercise because it's like a mock login, right? You're going to log in, kind of, but you're not actually going to gain access to anything in the site. In order to really implement a login, you're probably going to want sessions and cookies. And those are not real hard to implement, but those are something we're going to cover in week 10. I just couldn't quite get to them this week. So those will happen in week 10. They're really cool and useful, but the good news is they're super easy to work with. So don't worry about it. We'll get there. All right, so there's 2 pages I care about and 1 I don't. So again, here's the starter form. Notice it's got a button on it. You need to add the button to it. So anyways, we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go have a look at the code. So I've written some of the code already to expedite things. I've written the code, which I think that we've covered so far, right? I mean, with one exception. All right. So when you download this thing, there's not going to be any PHP in it. We'll come up to this part and have a look at that in a minute. You're just going to have this, right? Like the pure HTML and CSS. Scrolling down, we're looking at the form. You can see where like a require head and foot would be good here. So looking at my form, let's look at the details. So one detail is post, right? So we're using the post method here. For the action, I could set my action to register.php, but I showed you this technique earlier, and here it is again. So you remember this is a technique which will, basically this variable right here will link to the form itself. I'm not saying you need to do that. I just did it because I've talked about it, and you might as well see it in practice. Now, the reason we need to look at the form is these need to be passwords. I'm not going to ding you if you don't change that. It's just I kind of didn't really catch that, I guess. So anyways, we got this thing called uname. We got pass1. We got pass2. That's it. You also need to add that submit button. You do need to do that. You'll figure it out real quick that you don't have one. So you need to add that. And you need to know the form field names, and you need to know the method that you're using. So we're using post. So now that you know that, I can head up to the top and let's talk about the PHP. So some of this is already written. We'll talk about what that means. So I think the logical starting point here is to just jump into an is set. Now where this function is, I'm going to call this function down in here, so I want my function up above. This would make sense to have in like a helper function thing. But anyways, we'll talk all about that in a minute here. So my starting point is probably to have an is set, and remember we're looking for post variables, and I'm saying, hey, if there's a uname, then the form was submitted. I probably could be a little more thorough and also check for pass1 or pass2, but this just means the form was submitted, and that's good enough for me. So once I go, all right, so at the point where I can verify that the form was submitted, notice my closing parenthesis or curly brace. I need my require script because this is going to be database driven stuff. And then I just grab those 3 variables, uname, pass1, pass2. Also notice I'm running them through MySQLi real escape string, and we've done that for a couple weeks now. And notice, right, same thing as always, name of the variable that you want and the DBC. So that's a good starting point. This is stuff that we've covered before. We've reached a point where every time you're going to be using something for a database query, I want you to sanitize it. And this is just me getting variables, right? Nothing, I don't know if it seems interesting, but it's the kind of thing you've seen and done several times now. All right, at the point where you've written that, I advise that you probably go test it out. So if I refresh my page, remember how this works. It's all built on whether you submit the form. So I'm going to submit the form, and it looks like it worked. Now here's just a weird heads up on this one. The way I wrote this, I do some goofy things sometimes. But if you get error messages up in that opening PHP block, they're going to go up here. It's going to be weird, and they're going to be hard to see. Let me show you what I kind of mean. It'll look something like this. Notice, if I generate output, the way that this thing's written, you'll notice the page will just slide down. I'll show you. Do you see that? Like, you can't see it. You can select it and highlight it, but you can't see it. I'm just telling you. So that's what your error is going to look like. So maybe you want to write a CSS rule to make your font white. That would be easier to see. But that kind of like a black font on a black background doesn't work very well. All right, so at this point we've reached the starting point, and so now I think, according to our specs, the first thing to do here is just make sure that that password's good. So we've got a password, we've got pass1, and so I want to make sure that that password is good. So sounds like the kind of situation where I'd have an if block. So something like if, and I'm going to call this function, and we'll talk about the function. Valid PW. So the way it's written, I'm not saying you need to make a function out of this, but I would. Because this seems like a reusable thing, right? Anytime you're writing a reusable piece of code, maybe make it into a function. And so the thing I want to pass to that is called pass1. Now you might be thinking like we should also verify pass2. Not the case. Let me explain how that works. When you're asking someone to register, if this one's good, then that and that matches, then that is good too, right? I mean, you can put a huge password in here and put, one letter there. It doesn't matter, right? It's the problem's going to be that they don't match. So if this one's good and they match, then you don't need to check that one. All right, so I want to call that valid password function. I want to pass it pass1 and in here. And so this is going to be like if password is good. And so let's talk about this function. So it's function, valid password, takes the thing. So the first thing I'm checking, so I'm doing a nested if here. So I talk about this in the PowerPoint for the week. So one function is string length. That's what that stands for. So we're looking at it, and I think I said 6 in the specs. So the length of that string has to be at least 6. If it is, then we drop into this inner if. And so this C type, I also threw that in the weekly PowerPoint. What this does is this checks the password to see whether it is all uppercase. And so if it's not all uppercase and it's not all lowercase, well, guess what? That means that it has at least one uppercase and one lowercase in it. There's other ways you could check it. Like you could march through the string and kind of look at things on more of like a, I don't know, character by character level. I'm sure there's more efficient ways of doing this, but this is a pretty easy way to do it. So if it's at least 6 characters, has at least one lowercase and one uppercase, then we return true. Otherwise, nothing. You should know probably at this point, when you are working with a Boolean function in PHP, if it returns false, it doesn't return anything. So just having no other return is going to be the same as a return 0. I mean, I could have it there or not. So this thing right here is going to tell me whether my password's good. So since we're in the testing phases here, let's go echo. We'll say good password, just to make sure that this thing works, right? And I guess I might as well throw an else in here, just because I kind of like to see a message. I'll say echo bad password. Now you should know already at this point in the course that this is not where you want to spit out output. What you want to do is create like an output string and spit it out down below. But I just want to test whether this function's working or not. And also, here's another nice trick for you. Let's go to the body, and I'm going to say color that should give me a white font. So now if I reload the page, it's a bad password. Oh yeah, that didn't go so well because my labels are now white, but but at least I can see the message up there. It's not a big issue in the long term. So anyways, let's try that again. So I'm going to do good password, right? I just did an uppercase letter and a bunch of lowercase letters. And that is a good password. I don't know. I guess I'll test it one more time. So I'll do like an uppercase letter, lowercase letter, but not long enough. And I should get a bad password, right? I mean, I don't know. At this point, I'm not going to test it that much because I know it works. Like I said, this was a bad idea, but at least proved that things were working the way they were supposed to. So let's do this right and create an output string. Set it to nothing. And then instead of an echo, we'll just say out equals. This is a shorter lab, so I do get a chance to write a little bit more and make some mistakes and talk about it as opposed to just presenting a solution, so hopefully that's good. And so there's my output, and then probably what I should do is head down here, and I'll just do a little echo down here. So echo out. Right, that is how you address the issue of putting output in the right place. So now if I refresh this thing, that should go away. And, oh, there's my message, so I still can't read. Remember that CSS rule I wrote a minute ago? Yep, I don't want to do that anymore. So, I don't know, I hate refreshing when I know exactly what it's going to do, but there you go. All right, there's my feedback, which I will need at some point. All right, so at this point, we've gotten a lot of it done, actually. So look in here, we've verified the form was submitted, sanitizing all of our data. We have done that. And so now we start getting to the actual database part of things. So I'm going to pause it, and I'm going to write my create table script, because that's something that's not a lot of fun to write. But I'll show it to you when I'm done. Actually, before I do that, let me do the other check here. So, right, this thing's happening here, so we'll check for a valid password, and let's just do the nested if situation because I think it's a good way to do it. Let's also check to see that the passwords match, right? If pass1 is equal to pass2, then we say good password, something like that. But more importantly, I think what needs to happen is we need a flag. And we will start it off as false, I guess. And we'll flip that flag to true here. Right, so we'll just flip the flag to true if it's valid and they match. Right, that's the situation where we actually want to do an insert into our table. Right, if they don't match, no insert. All right, we'll just leave that like that. So there's no else on this. Just an if. All right, and so now it just makes sense to me to do that before I decide to do my my create table script, but that's going to happen right now. So here's my SQL. So create table if not exists. Give it a name. I called my lab 8 login. It's got a primary key called ID. It's got a username and it's got a password. You don't store password 2 because it's just password 1. Now, you might be wondering, is pass1 a good name for a column? I mean, it's a weird name, right? Why not just call it pass? Well, I just know the way that we're going to be writing things, we're going to be consistently referring to this thing as pass1, so I'm going to call that pass1, and then I'm recording a timestamp. If you want to get more information, certainly go ahead. Anytime you're creating a site like this, you would always ask for more stuff than a username and a password. Actually, that's not true, but it's usually true. All right, so there's that. And then I might as well write my standard little query. And at this point, you should refresh your page. And if nothing bad happens, then it probably means it happened. So if you really don't trust the process, go into your PHPMyAdmin, click on the name of your database, whatever you're using, go in there and see if there's some login, lab 8 login right there, and it doesn't have anything in it, so it's not real interesting, but it did get created, so that's probably good. Alright. So let's start working on the insert. So the insert on the surface isn't real interesting, but I'm going to show you why it's more interesting than it seems like. So what I want to do here is I'm just going to do write my little SQL. I'll pause it and I'll come back in a second. Alright, so I wrote a simple insert, just uname and pass. Oh, also, so sorry, before I get kind of crazy here, this whole chunk right here needs to be wrapped in an if block, right? Like, if the password's no good, then don't even think about this. And so the password is represented by flag, right? Remember that variable I created a little bit ago? So I'm going to do this. Sorry, I kind of missed on it. But basically, I want a little if block, and then this thing goes in there. Who knows? Maybe that's a good way to illustrate what we're doing. I don't know. Just let me straighten out all my indentation here. Alright, so remember this flag, it only gets flipped to true if the passwords are good. If the passwords are good and a username exists, well, there we go. So let's try this out. So first thing I'm going to need to do is refresh. It's a bad password, I know that because it already was bad. So I'm going to put in a name like Ken and a crappy password like A, B, C, D, E, F. I guess that's good, right? A, B, C, D, E, F. And here is the point where you realize how difficult it is to test a login application. You have to keep entering these passwords, and you got to keep getting them right. So I submit, that should be a good password. A good password should mean that a row got inserted. So let's go check our table now. And that might not go perfectly for you. It should. Alright. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. And I'm going to try and talk about this in the YouTube videos for this week a lot. But realize, so imagine that this is a real application, right? Like some subscription program or something where you got 1 million different users. The problem with this from an administrator perspective, such as mine, is I'm the admin. So I'm going to have the ability to do all kinds of things. But I shouldn't know people's passwords. That's a problem, right? That really is a problem. Imagine just this wall of usernames and passwords. The interesting thing about it is that probably you know how the real world works. Like if I know this guy named Ken and his new username's Ken, I mean that's probably his username and password at multiple sites. So that is a problem. We're not allowed to. I mean his password may be that, and there's not a whole lot I can do about that. Right? I mean, there's all kinds of things which conform to this set of rules right here that just aren't great. But what we can do on our end is we have an obligation not to store the information in plain text like that. And so I'll show you how we fix that with hashing, which is the big thing that we're talking about this week. That's why oftentimes when you hear about like a database that gets hacked, they're like, oh, you know, the database was hacked, but they didn't get any of the passwords. Because they don't store them like that. We can't store them like that. So let's talk about hashing and salting, and that's going to be the next part of this. So a hash works like this. So we don't just want to do that, because that's a problem. So what we do want to do is head down in here. We need to do some work on that password. So we can't store that just ABCDF. Instead, what we want to do, we'll do it like this. So I'll say pass1. So I'm just going to overwrite the value of it. And I'm going to call a function called hash. And the hash function takes a string and then a thing that you want to hash. The first string is going to be the name of the hashing algorithm. SHA-512 is a pretty good hashing algorithm. And the thing that I want to hash is called pass1. And right, so take that thing and hash it. A hash is a one-way thing, so it's just going to turn into a big string of gibberish. So as opposed to, right, the password is still ABCDEF, but you'll see the way it's represented in the table is going to be a lot different. I'm going to save that. I'm going to refresh. And so the weird thing about a refresh is it's kind of going to create that same username and same password, which is not good. But I'll show you, for comparison's sake, how it looks. So if I browse it again, that's hashed, that's not hashed. Right, so imagine if someone got access to this administrative console, right? Somehow they got access to this. This is a bad situation because they know that there's some guy running around out there named Ken who has that password. But if they see this, they don't know what the password is. And this is not encryption, it's a hash, right? In the world of encryption, you mix something up and then you do something to de-scramble it. A hash is a one-way thing. There is no de-scrambling it, which kind of makes it weird. Like, how do they ever log in again? Well, we'll see that soon enough. But that's a better way to store the data. And now, just me as the network administrator, I don't know anyone's password, right? I don't have any You know what I mean? Whereas this, I have to utilize judgment and be ethical with this. Well, what am I going to do with it? All right, so that's a good step. Now salting is kind of an interesting one. So this kind of washes our hands a little bit. We're feeling a lot better about storing that than we are that. But here's kind of the thing. Well, I guess someone, if they had a look at this table, what they could do is compare this against hashed common passwords. So there's tons of lists out there that have all the common passwords and simple passwords. So I mean, you could possibly catch this based on like just hashing common passwords. And so another level we can do to this is it's called salting. And so salting can be complicated or not. But basically salting works like this. So I'm going to say pass1 equals, this would be real simple, pass1, and then I concatenate on like, a string of garbage like that. Like, why the heck would I ever do that? Well, so now, like that lame password of A, B, C, D, E, F, which is lame and easy to guess, now I'm going to have that lame password, I'm going to tack a whole bunch of garbage onto it, and then I'm going to hash it. Now, I don't know. I mean, I guess you probably can see what I'm doing. It might not be real clear why I'm doing what I'm doing. If I do it again, let me show you the database now. And so now, totally different thing, right? And so you can't decrypt this. So, like, this is somewhat vulnerable because as much as this was a lame password, this is a lame password through a common hash. This right here is some kooky password through a common hash. Right? You're not going to be able to reverse engineer this password. I mean, you could, in the event that like the attacker had access to the script and could see what we were salting it with, that would be a problem. But at the point where the attacker has access to the scripts and the backend table, you've had a really, really big data breach, and you've got a world of problems at that point. But so I don't know how I did with that. It's one of those things in a face-to-face class I would talk about a lot. So really lame password, very problematic for us. This, we get to wash our hands of the problem. Like, I don't know your password, right? It's not my fault, kind of, sort of. Like, I definitely didn't use your password, but this is somewhat vulnerable because this is a lame password with a common hash. Now, this is just some random string of garbage, essentially, with a hash. And so that's a lot safer. That's what salt is. There's random salt, there's complicated salt. That's a pretty simple salt. If you're talking about salt, there's no reason you couldn't salt it up like that if you want to, right? Add salt to the end, add salt to the beginning. There's all kinds of ways that you can salt a password, but that's password security. So that should make some sense. Now the interesting thing is, how the heck do you log in when it's all hashed and you got salt on it and such? And so that's the next part of the journey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some requires out of this page so I can simplify my next one. So give me a minute and I'll be back. So all I did is open up the like that index page, and I'm just going to grab this stuff. Right, I'm grabbing my head. Yeah, we'll grab that. Create a new page, paste that. Call this my head.html. Save that. Head back on over here. Replace that with a require. Oops, I forgot a bunch of backticks and such. And there's my nav. Nav's not, I don't really need to do a require out of this, but I kind of preach the idea that you should, so I will. I'll save as nav.html. Save that. And then very similar statement, just nav. Now I could grab the footer, but this project's not going anywhere, so I'm not going to do anything with the footer. Let's make sure that this page works. So the best way to verify that I didn't totally destroy everything would be go to that home page. All right, looks good. Now it's our job to write this login page. So the thing you need to notice is that the link there, this page needs to be called login.php. So I will create a new page. File, save as, login.php. This is one of those things you're creating from scratch. Up to the top, I'm going to have a require head. And down here, I guess I can just go straight into my require nav. And now here's the ugly thing. Here I'm about to pay the price of my lack of judgment a minute ago. Remember when I didn't do the footer? Right, I didn't do a require for that, so then I'm gonna have to get weird and go over here, and so it's gonna be that stuff. At this point, you might appreciate why even something simple like that probably should be a footer. Yeah, I can't even bring myself to do it, so I'm gonna cut it. Create a new page, paste that, save as foot. It just pains me. I mean, I'm fine with doing no requires at all, but I really can't stand just doing like partial requires because I know it's going to be bad in the long run. Alright, to save that, head on over to this page, and then I guess down at the bottom I'll have that other require. Alright, and let's have a look at this page. So this page is going to be available over here. Alright, so I did something wrong on line 4. Oh, forgot a semicolon there. I had a feeling I was doing bad things. Alright, so let me look at, just compare things. Okay, so, oh hey, my foot failed. I don't know. Let me go debug that. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you watch me do this. It's called .php. Right, accident, but I did it, and so let's be consistent. Okay, I got it there. All right. Anyways, let me go back. Sorry when I'm jumping around. This is just kind of what needs to happen. So my login page. This is actually not going to be as complicated as it seems like. First thing I need to do is create a simple form. And that form, I'm just telling you, if I'm trying to do this the easy way, which I don't really see why I wouldn't, is if I head over to the register page, I might as well just steal this form, literally, right? Why not? It's almost the same form. So I head over to my login page, drop that right here, save that. This probably needs to be saved as well. So there's no repeat password. But aside from that, it's the exact same form, right? So you can probably see why I'd want to do that. And at this point, you might appreciate why I did this, right? I was literally able to, because normally when you kind of cut and paste a form, which isn't an uncommon thing to do at all, you have to change the action. So we save this. And I'm sure this works, so I'm really not even going to think, I'm not even going to test it, because there's just no reason to think it wouldn't work. It's just a form. It doesn't do anything. Let's go up in here, and so there's going to be an is set. So if is set, and we're looking for $_ post. And again, let's do what we did before and just look for the uname. You don't need to look for the password. There's a good reason for that, actually. Because if someone wants to put a blank password in here, well, their login's going to be wrong, so you don't really need to validate that at all. And then, so things are real similar, so I'm going to be kind of lazy here, which I'm not entirely against. I need some of the stuff from that previous page. Namely, I need like literally that, right? Require, exact same. Uname, pass1, right? Same stuff. So I'm going to head in here and just paste that in there, right? You can see why that makes sense. All right, so at this point I've got some things that are testable, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back and have a look at the actual page, refresh my login page. I'm going to put in a thing like that. And if nothing explodes, I can probably assume that things are going okay. So now it's time for the kind of simple query stuff. So I'm going to do this naively, so don't get too excited. Don't write that you know it's not going to work if you know why it's not going to work, but I'm just going to try and we'll see how this goes. So it's going to be relatively simple SQL here. It's just going to be something like select. And so you could do select star from whatever that table was called. And at this point, I'm actually realizing that I probably should steal that create script as well. It's because why not? Right? Like if it doesn't exist, it needs to exist. So before I query the table, I'm just going to guarantee that it exists by doing that. And I also don't have to look up the fields anymore, which I greatly appreciate. So it's called lab 8 login where, and then I just want to look at the username and look at the password. So it's going to be uname equals something, and what are we calling it? Pass1 equals something. And so uname is going to be $uname, and pass1 is going to be $pass1. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. Now, select star seems like a weird thing. Oftentimes people will just write select one, right? Like it's either, if there's a matching row, it's going to give you something. Because it depends what you want to do with it. So that's kind of what my SQL looks like. And let's try processing it and see how it goes. So pass it the DBC and the SQL, and that should work unless it doesn't. So we'll do a or die. Bad SQL, and that should be enough for us to try. And this is going to be weird. You're not going to know whether it worked or not, but trust me, we're not very far away. If I refresh this, that thing's going to happen. And the fact that nothing happened, I don't know what that means. So presumably, though, this stuff's happening, right? When you're not producing any output, it's kind of problematic. So I'm going to create an output string, and I will initialize it to nothing. So I'm going to run this query, and basically, I could do something like this. I could say like if MySQLi fetch ASOC, then so there's a lot of ways I could handle this. Like a perfectly reasonable thing to do would be MySQLi numRows, right? If it's greater than 0, then it means you got someone. But you remember how this works too? Remember this function? You call it, and if it gets a row, it gets a row. If it doesn't, then it just returns false. So this also works. It's a weird way of doing it. I don't mind doing things weird ways. So if there's a row to fetch, then I'll set that out variable to success. Something like that, right? A couple exclamation points. Otherwise, that means that you are try again. All right, so I'm hoping we see try again, just so you're prepared for it. I'll just drop it down in here. All right, so that's where my output's gonna go. Now let's have a look and test it out, see how it works. I'm hoping for a non-match. All right, try again. So let's let me illustrate the problem here. I'm gonna spit out the SQL query, and I think you're gonna see kind of sort of what's happening. So try again, select one from lab 8 login where uname equals Ken and pass equals Ken. Of course that didn't work, right? I don't remember what I did do. I think I did what, Ken and then ABCDF. Telling you, oh, that's actually a bad example because it's actually going to work. All right. Success. Oops. How about let me do success, and then I'm going to echo out that SQL so you can see a little bit better of what's happening. So there's a weird thing going on because I did this wrong. Success, and you can see the matching row, right? Like Ken, A, B, C, D, E, F. But here's the thing. That password shouldn't exist, so I'm going to delete that one. That was before we salted and hashed. Right? Because that was a bad record. That shouldn't be in there. Now if I refresh, hopefully I get something like failure because that row doesn't exist. Try again. All right. So how do we make that? So basically that needs to match up with that one, right? That's the unhashed one, or sorry, that's the hashed one. That's the hashed and salted one. This is kind of garbage too because we did eventually salt it. All right, so how do I make that ABCDF turn into that? Well, I highly suggest that you do the same process that you did before. Like literally, there's no reason you shouldn't copy and paste this like that. Do these. All right, so you went through a couple operations before you stored it, so you quite simply just go through a couple operations before you retrieve it. So before I do that query, I'm just going to do that stuff, right? So take that password and salt it the same way I salted it before, and take that password and hash it the same way I hashed it before, and then compare it. Right, so we don't compare the actual password that the user entered, we compare the salted and hashed password. And so this should yield the results that we want. So if I refresh this thing now, you should see a success. Oh, and it's horrible, right? It looks horrible, but right, that's what it's supposed to look like. So that password they're entering, we do care what it is, but it's always invisible. It's just, right, we just process it, and then you compare it, and then it works. And so that no longer needs to be here. I was just putting in here to illustrate what was going on. And so let's get a little bit more. If I really wanted to do a decent job with this, let me create a flag. Actually, no, I'm not going to do a flag. So what I was considering was making a flag. And so like if you had a successful login, I would not show the form. And if it was unsuccessful, then I would show the form. But the issue is, right, this is not that functional in the first place. I just want to build a tool that you can play around with, right, so that you can get stuff wrong. Mash some stuff, and I get a failure. Oh, I didn't refresh it really, I guess, because that junk shouldn't be up there anymore. Yeah, why is it up there? I thought maybe I didn't save it. Yeah, I didn't save it. So this is as far as we're going. That's when I started off this video, I said that this is going to be kind of a weird process because you're going to create this like tool which kind of seems like it works, but it doesn't really work. But in the process, you've built something that you can, I think, hopefully you can see how this is supposed to work. And hopefully you now understand like why we want to salt and hash things, just for like the security of our database perspective. It's, we don't get into database security a lot in this class because frankly there's database classes for that. But this is one thing that we do have to handle on the PHP end of things. So we do have some say in how that password is stored permanently. And so that's what a salt and hash looks like. That's a pretty lame salt job that I did, honestly. But it's the same idea. Right, so that is the lab. So hopefully that goes pretty well for you. That's a good starting point for your homework. And your last homework's a 2-week one. I'm not giving you the tools for sessions and cookies yet, just because I'm having a hard time fitting into the week. But that's going to be something that's going to happen in week 10. And I'm telling you right now that sessions and cookies are literally only a couple lines. So it's easy to do, but the kind of gotcha on it is it's kind of similar to redirects, where it has to happen before you put any HTML on the page. So that kind of thing. So that was Lab 8, and that should give you a good start on your assignment.